"I came 400 miles for the quiet one," the Duke said, and the pretty one dropped her fan. It clattered to the marble floor with a sharp, discordant sound, a tiny crack in the symphony of the ballroom. For a moment, the music seemed to falter, the swirl of silk and scent of wax and perfume holding its breath. My stepsister, Rosalind, the sun around which our small family galaxy revolved, stood frozen, her perfect Cupid's bow mouth slightly agape. Her fan, a delicate thing of painted silk and ivory, lay at her feet like a fallen bird. But no one was looking at her. For the first time in her life, perhaps, no one was looking at Rosalind. They were all looking at me. I was tucked into a shadowed alcove behind a wilting potted palm, a place I had chosen with practiced care. It was my natural habitat at these functions, the forgotten corner, the space between spaces, the niche where a piece of unremarkable furniture might be placed and promptly ignored. I was the unremarkable furniture. My dress was a serviceable gray, the color of invisibility. My hair was bound in a simple knot that my stepmother, Lady Beatrice, declared was the only suitable style for a face as unfortunate as mine. I had long ago learned to make myself small, to fold my edges inward until I took up almost no room at all. It was a form of self-preservation, a silent treaty I had made with the world. You do not see me, and I will not trouble you. Lady Beatrice had reinforced this treaty just an hour before. As Rosalind was having the final pearl pinned in her radiant blonde hair, my stepmother's gaze had flicked to me. "Ilara, do try to find a corner near the refreshments. If you look occupied, perhaps no one will feel obligated to make conversation with you. We wouldn't want to inflict your solemnity on the festivities." Her voice was like honey laced with ground glass. My father, standing by the door, had simply studied the pattern on the rug, his shoulders slumped in their familiar posture of capitulation. So I had found my corner. I watched the dancers spin, a kaleidoscope of jewel tones and flashing smiles. I watched Rosalind hold court, a flock of young lords vying for a single glance from her violet eyes. I was not jealous. Jealousy required a belief that such things were attainable. I had no such illusions. I felt only a dull, persistent ache, the phantom limb of a life I might have lived had my mother not died, had my father not remarried a woman whose heart was a tiny, polished stone. Then he had arrived. The Duke of Blackwood, Alaric. The name itself was a whisper of granite and northern winds. He was a myth made manifest, a man spoken of in hushed, intimidated tones. Impossibly wealthy, notoriously reclusive, and carrying a grief so profound, it was said to have permanently chilled the air around him. The ballroom's cheerful hum had dipped into a reverent silence as he entered. He was tall, dressed in severe black that seemed to absorb the candlelight, his face a study in harsh, beautiful lines. He did not smile. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept the room with an unnerving stillness. Lady Beatrice had practically vibrated with ambition. She steered Rosalind into his path with the subtlety of a battleship. "Your Grace," she cooed, her voice dripping with saccharine deference. "May I present my daughter, Rosalind? She has so admired your work in land management." The Duke's gaze had passed over Rosalind as if she were a pane of clear glass. It had moved past the glittering chandeliers, past the hopeful debutantes, past my own cowering father, and had come to rest, impossibly, on my shadowed alcove. He had started walking. Not strolling, but moving with a purpose that parted the crowd like a ship's prow through water. Every step he took toward me was a beat of a drum counting down to my own execution. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. This had to be a mistake, a cruel, elaborate jest. He was going to stop, laugh, and point out the pathetic little mouse hiding in the corner. He stopped directly in front of my palm tree. He was even taller up close, a looming shadow that blocked out the rest of the world. Lady Beatrice had scurried after him, her face a mask of frantic confusion. "Your Grace, perhaps you are looking for someone. The receiving line is over there." He did not look at her. His eyes, intense and unnervingly perceptive, were fixed on me. And then he spoke the words that shattered the world. I came 400 miles for the quiet one. The fan dropped, the music stopped. My breath caught in my throat, a painful, sharp thing. He was looking at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me. It felt like standing in the full glare of the sun after a lifetime in a cellar. It was blinding. It was terrifying. "Ilara," he said, and my own name sounded foreign on his lips. "I believe you and I have a great deal to discuss. Specifically, the fascinating structural deficiencies of pre-Norman fortifications." My mind, which had been a maelstrom of panic, suddenly went still. Pre-Norman fortifications. The subject of a scholarly monograph I had written under a male pseudonym and submitted to the Royal Antiquarian Society 6 months ago. A piece of my soul I had hidden from the world, my only secret joy. No one knew. No one could possibly know. Before I could form a single, coherent word, he extended a gloved hand. "Will you walk with me?" It was not a request. It was a quiet command, layered with an authority that brooked no argument. My own hand, small and trembling, rose as if of its own accord and rested in his. His grip was firm, warm, and real. He drew me out of the shadows and into the light, and as we walked toward the terrace doors, the stunned silence of the entire ballroom followed us like a shroud. I did not dare look back at the ruin of my stepmother's face or the shock on my sister's. For the first time, I was not looking back. I was being led forward, and I was utterly, terrifyingly lost. The days that followed were a study in bewilderment. The Duke of Blackwood did not, as my stepmother had hissed was his likely intent, ruin me on the terrace and cast me aside. He walked me to its edge, where the cool night air was a balm on my heated skin, and for 20 minutes he spoke of nothing but stone. He discussed my theory on the use of herringbone brickwork as a stabilizing agent in early keeps, questioning me with a precision that was both daunting and exhilarating. It was the first real conversation I had held with another human being in years. When he returned me to my stepmother's side, her smile was stretched so tight I feared it might crack her powdered cheeks. He bowed, his gaze lingering on me for a fraction of a second too long. "I will call on you tomorrow, Miss Ashworth, at 11. The carriage ride home was a silent, suffocating affair. Lady Beatrice seethed in her corner, radiating a palpable fury. Rosalind stared out the window, twisting a ribbon on her dress into knots. My father cleared his throat several times, but said nothing. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. I felt like a criminal, though I did not know what crime I had committed, other than the sin of being noticed. "This is some trick," Lady Beatrice finally spat as we entered the house. "Some perverse game. A man like that does not want you." The final word was delivered with a flick of her wrist, as if she were shooing away an insect. "He is toying with us. Humiliating us for some private amusement. You will put an end to it, Ilara. When he calls tomorrow, you will be indisposed. A headache, a fever, I do not care." "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it fell into the tense silence of the foyer with the weight of a stone. All three of them stared at me. I had never contradicted her before. I had never had a reason to. My father looked startled. Rosalind looked intrigued. Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "What did you say?" "He asked to see me," I repeated, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I will see him." I did not know where this courage came from. Perhaps it was the memory of his eyes, which had not looked at me with pity, but was something that felt dangerously like respect. Perhaps it was the simple, profound shock of being called by my name and having my thoughts, not my face, be the object of interest. Whatever its source, it was a tiny, fragile flame in the vast darkness of my life, and I would not let her snuff it out. The next morning, at precisely 11, the Duke's carriage, a gleaming black lacquer vessel pulled by 4 perfectly matched grays, drew up to our door. I had dressed in my best day dress, a simple navy blue wool, and waited in the morning room, my hands clenched in my lap. I was terrified she would physically bar my way, but when the butler announced his arrival, Lady Beatrice merely swept into the room behind him, her face arranged into a mask of maternal concern. "Your Grace, so good of you to call," she said. "Ilara has been so looking forward to it. Though I must confess she is a terribly shy creature, quite lost in her own little world of books and dust, not like my Rosalind, who has such a lively spirit." The Duke gave her a cool, dismissive nod before turning his full attention to me. "Miss Ashworth, I trust you slept well." "I did not sleep at all, Your Grace," I answered honestly. A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, danced in the depths of his gray eyes. "Nor did I. I was rereading your chapter on the defensive limitations of the Motte and Bailey. You were too dismissive of its psychological impact on the local populace." Lady Beatrice's smile faltered. This was not the polite, empty chatter she understood. This was a language she could not speak. He had built a wall of words around us, and she was on the outside. He had brought a book with him, a heavy, leather-bound tome. It was a first edition of Vitruvius's De Architectura, a treasure so rare I had only ever read of it. He placed it in my hands. It felt like holding a sacred object. "I thought you might appreciate it," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A fellow practitioner." I could only stare at the gilded pages, my throat tight with an emotion I could not name. It was more than kindness, it was recognition. He saw the person I kept hidden from the world, the person I myself had almost forgotten existed. He had looked into my gray, quiet life and found a single vibrant thread of color, and he was pulling on it. My stepmother, unable to bear her irrelevance a moment longer, interjected. "How very thoughtful. Ilara, do not keep the Duke waiting. Offer His Grace some tea." "That won't be necessary," he said, his gaze never leaving my face. "I have come to invite Miss Ashworth for a drive. There is a ruined abbey at Northwood I believe she would find of interest." It was a direct challenge to her authority, and we all knew it. To allow me to go out with him, unchaperoned, was a social impropriety of the highest order. But to refuse a duke of his standing was unthinkable. Lady Beatrice was trapped. Her face paled, the carefully applied rouge standing out in two angry spots on her cheeks. "Of course," she said through gritted teeth. "Ilara, fetch your cloak." As I walked out of our house and into the crisp autumn air, stepping into the impossibly luxurious carriage beside the Duke of Blackwood, I felt a tremor of hope so fierce it was almost painful. It was a dangerous feeling, one I had long since taught myself to live without. Hope was a window, and for people like me, windows were only ever used for looking in at lives we could never lead. But as the carriage pulled away, leaving my stepmother standing on the steps with a face like thunder, I dared to look out the window and wonder if, just this once, it might be for looking out at a future that was my own. The ruined abbey was a skeleton of stone against a pale sky. It stood on a hill overlooking a windswept moor, a place of profound and desolate beauty. We walked among the fallen walls and sightless archways, the wind whipping strands of hair from my carefully constructed bun. I should have felt self-conscious, but I did not. For the first time, I felt free. The Duke, Alaric, as he insisted I call him, seemed at home here. The severity of his expression softened in the wildness of the landscape. He moved with a quiet confidence, pointing out the unique groin vaulting in the collapsed chancel and the unusual placement of the chapter house. He spoke not as a nobleman making idle conversation, but as a scholar speaking to a peer. "You see how the masons used a lighter tufa stone for the upper vaults?" he said, running a gloved hand over the weathered rock. A concession to the unstable peat soil beneath. It was a risk, ambitious. I admire that. "It failed," I pointed out, gesturing to the rubble around us. "All things fail eventually, Ilara," he replied, turning to look at me. His eyes were serious. "The question is whether they were worth building in the first place." This was. I knew he was not just talking about the abbey. We stood there for a long moment, the wind howling a lonely song around us, and I felt the truth of his words settle deep in my bones. He was speaking of endeavors, of passions, of lives. My own small, quiet life, spent in the shadows, suddenly felt like a ruin of a different kind, a structure that had never been given the chance to be built at all. During our third meeting, He invited me to his town residence. It was a formidable stone mansion on the most exclusive square in the city, a place that seemed to command silence from the bustling streets around it. Inside, it was not the opulent palace I had expected. It was stark, masculine, and filled with books. Every wall was lined with shelves that groaned under the weight of leather-bound volumes. The air smelled of old paper, beeswax, and wood smoke. It was the most beautiful home I had ever seen. We sat in his library, a vast, two-story room with a rolling ladder and a fireplace large enough to stand in. A formidable-looking housekeeper with iron-gray hair, a Mistress Gable, served us tea with a formal but not unkind air. She watched me with shrewd, intelligent eyes, and I had the distinct impression I was being assessed. Alaric made no pretense of polite conversation. He unrolled a series of architectural drawings across a massive oak table. "My new conservatory," he said, his voice flat. "The plans are flawed. Tell me where." I hesitated, intimidated by the scale of the project and the abruptness of his request. But then I looked at the drawings, and the world outside them fell away. The lines and angles were a language I understood better than words. I saw it almost immediately, a miscalculation in the load-bearing capacity of the northern buttresses, a weakness in the design of the glazed roof that would not withstand a heavy snowfall. My finger, trembling slightly, traced the erroneous line. "Here," I whispered. "The stress distribution is incorrect. The pitch of the roof puts too much pressure on this single point. In a storm, it would collapse." He was silent for so long that I was certain I had offended him. I began to stammer an apology, my face burning with shame. "Do not apologize for being correct," he cut in, his voice rough. He looked not at the plans, but at me, and in his eyes I saw a flash of raw, unguarded pain. "That is the same mistake my brother made." And then the story came out, not in a flood, but in terse, clipped sentences, each one costing him a visible effort. His younger brother, Edmund, had been a brilliant, daring architect. It was his passion, his art. 5 years ago, he had been designing a great hall for a new university. Alaric had funded the project, proud of his brother's genius. But Edmund, in his artistic fervor, had overlooked a single fatal flaw in his calculations. The roof had collapsed during construction. Edmund had been inside. He had died instantly. "I should have seen it," Alaric said, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "I studied with him. I reviewed the plans. But I was blinded by my admiration for his vision. I failed him." The world now understood his reclusiveness, his severity, his obsession with structure and integrity. It was not coldness, it was a penance. He had retreated into a fortress of his own making, a world of facts and figures where emotion was a dangerous variable. He surrounded himself with books, with old, solid things that had stood the test of time, because he was haunted by a beautiful, ambitious thing that had not. My heart ached for him, for the lonely man beneath the ducal coronet. Without thinking, I reached across the table and laid my hand over his clenched fist. It was a shockingly intimate gesture, a breach of every rule of propriety. His hand was as rigid as stone beneath mine. He did not pull away. He slowly, deliberately, turned his hand over and laced his fingers through mine. His grip was strong, enveloping. We sat there in the quiet of his library, our hands joined over the flawed blueprints, and the silence was filled with a meaning more profound than any words. In that moment, I understood that he was not just interested in my mind. He was a man with a shattered foundation, and he was looking for someone who understood how to build. Our connection, forged in the quiet language of architecture and shared sorrow, deepened with each passing day. We were an unlikely pair, the reclusive, powerful duke and the invisible, penniless ward. Yet in each other's company, those labels seemed to dissolve. He was simply Alaric, a man of fierce intelligence and a carefully guarded heart. And I, for the first time, was simply Ilara, a woman with thoughts and ideas worthy of being heard. He sent his carriage for me almost daily. We visited construction sites, walked through ancient city gates, and spent hours in the hushed halls of museums, debating the merits of Gothic versus Palladian design. To the outside world, it was a bizarre and scandalous courtship. To us, it was a conversation, long and intricate, between two minds that had finally found their counterpart. One afternoon, while examining a delicate silver astrolabe in a dusty corner of the city museum, our shoulders brushed. It was a fleeting, incidental contact, but it sent a jolt through me, a warmth that had nothing to do with the weak afternoon sun slanting through the grimy windows. I looked up at him and found him already watching me, his expression unreadable. His gaze dropped to my lips, and for a breathless second, I thought he might kiss me. The air grew thick, charged with a new and unfamiliar tension. Then, the moment was broken by the grating voice of my stepmother. "There you are, Alara. I have been looking everywhere." Lady Beatrice stood at the end of the gallery, flanked by Rosalind. Her smile was a predatory slash of red against her pale face. She had taken to accidentally appearing wherever Alaric and I went, a constant cloying presence designed to remind him of her existence and, more importantly, of Rosalind's. "Your Grace," she purred, gliding toward us. "How lovely to see you. Rosalind was just saying how she longed to see the museum's collection of Roman cameos. She has such a delicate appreciation for beauty." Rosalind, to her credit, looked deeply uncomfortable. She gave me a small, apologetic glance. In the weeks since Alaric's arrival, a subtle shift had occurred in my stepsister. The initial shock had given way to a quiet curiosity. She had started seeking me out in the evenings, asking me questions about my day, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion as I tried to explain the principles of a flying buttress. She was not cruel, my sister. She was simply a product of her upbringing, a beautifully cultivated flower who had never been taught to look beyond the walls of her own garden. Alaric's response to my stepmother's intrusion was to turn his back on her completely. He picked up the astrolabe, his long fingers tracing its intricate markings. "The precision is remarkable," he said, his voice low and directed only at me. "To chart the heavens with such elegance, it requires a mind that sees beyond the immediate, that understands the vast, interconnected patterns of the universe." He placed it gently back in its case and then met my eyes. A rare quality. The dismissal was so absolute, so profound, that Lady Beatrice was left speechless. She simply stood there, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish. He had not just ignored her, he had rendered her and her ambitions utterly irrelevant. He had drawn a circle around the two of us, and there was no room in it for anyone else. That evening, the storm broke. Lady Beatrice cornered me in my room. The pretense of civility was gone. Her face was contorted with a rage that made her ugly. "You think you have won, don't you?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You, the little gray mouse. You think you can steal a prize meant for your betters." "I am not stealing anything," I said, my voice trembling but firm. We enjoy each other's company." She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Company? Do not be a fool. He is amusing himself with you. You are a novelty, a pet scholar he can show off before he tires of you and marries a woman of suitable beauty and station. A woman like Rosalind." "Then why are you so angry?" I asked, a spark of defiance flaring within me. Her eyes blazed. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "Because you are ruining everything. My plans, Rosalind's future. You are a useless, selfish creature, but this ends now." She released me with a shove, and I stumbled back against my small writing desk. Her expression turned sly, triumphant. "I have taken matters into my own hands. A match has been arranged for you, Baron Croft. He is an older gentleman, a widower, but a man of property. He is eager to have a quiet, biddable wife to manage his household. You will be married within the fortnight." The name hit me like a physical blow. Baron Croft was not a gentleman. He was a corpulent, lecherous old man with a reputation for cruelty to his staff and his horses. His property was a crumbling estate mortgaged to the hilt. He was a monster, a boor, a walking ruin. "No," I whispered, horror chilling me to the bone. "Father would never agree to that." "Your father has already agreed," she said with a smirk. "The Baron has been most generous in settling some of your father's unfortunate debts. It is all settled. You will write to the Duke in the morning and inform him that you will not be seeing him again due to your impending nuptials. You will be gracious. You will thank him for his patronage." It was a checkmate. She had trapped me. She would not only remove me as a threat, but also profit from my disposal. I would be buried alive in the country with a man who would crush what little spirit I had left. The fragile hope that had begun to bloom in my heart withered and died, turning to ash. I saw my future stretching before me, a long, gray road of silent servitude ending in an unmarked grave. But my stepmother had made one final, crucial move. It was not enough to simply remove me. She had to destroy any esteem the Duke might hold for me. The next morning, a letter arrived for Alaric. I knew, because he told me later, that it was written on elegant cream stationery in a flowing, anonymous hand. It purported to be from a concerned friend of the Ashworth family. The letter was a masterpiece of insidious poison. It painted a picture of me as a pathetic, grasping creature, mentally unstable and prone to flights of fancy. It claimed I had been obsessed with the Duke for years, collecting articles about him and weaving elaborate fantasies. And then came the killing blow. It alleged that my monograph on fortifications was not my own work at all, but had been plagiarized from the unpublished papers of my late maternal grandfather, a noted amateur historian. I was not just a deluded spinster, I was a fraud. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my room. I was a prisoner, waiting for my sentence to be carried out. I did not write the letter my stepmother demanded. I could not. I sat at my desk, staring at a blank sheet of paper, my mind a numb void. There was nothing left to say. She had won. The brief, sunlit interlude was over, and the shadows were closing in again, darker and more permanent than before. 2 days passed in a haze of despair. Rosalind came to my door once, her face etched with pity. "I told her it was wrong, Alara," she whispered, "but she would not listen. Father will not stand up to her. I am so sorry." I appreciated her words, but they were a small comfort against the looming abyss. On the third day, the day the betrothal contracts were to be signed, a carriage arrived. It was not the Baron's carriage, it was the Duke's. My stepmother met him in the formal drawing room, her face a perfect portrait of solicitous regret. I was summoned, a lamb to the slaughter. My father was there, looking pale and miserable, and in the corner, smelling of brandy and stale cigars, sat Baron Croft, his small, piggy eyes appraising me like livestock. "Your Grace," Lady Beatrice began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is a surprise. I am afraid we are in the midst of a rather delicate family matter. As you know, our dear Alara is to be married." Alaric stood by the fireplace, his posture relaxed, but his presence dominated the room. He held a sheaf of papers in one hand. He did not look at her. He looked at me, and his eyes were not cold or angry. They were calm, steady, and filled with a resolve that sent a tiny, impossible flicker of life through my frozen heart. "I am aware," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "I received a most interesting letter concerning Miss Ashworth. It contained some very serious allegations. Allegations of plagiarism." Lady Beatrice feigned a gasp. "Oh, heavens! I cannot imagine who would spread such wicked lies. Poor Alara, she is so fragile." "Indeed," Alaric said smoothly. "The letter suggested her work was stolen from her grandfather. So, I took the liberty of having my solicitors locate her grandfather's papers. They are held at his alma mater. I also took the liberty of engaging the country's foremost expert on paper and ink analysis." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "He found something quite remarkable. The paper on which your grandfather's notes are written contains a watermark that was not in use until 3 years after his death. The ink is even newer. They are forgeries, and rather clumsy ones at that." A strangled sound escaped my stepmother's throat. The color drained from her face, leaving her rouge standing out in garish circles. "But my investigation did not end there," Alaric continued, his voice as sharp and cold as ice. "Because I wondered what would motivate such a clumsy and vicious deception. And the answer, as it so often is, was money." He laid his papers on the mantelpiece. "These are bank records. They show a systematic withdrawal of funds from a trust account. An account set up by Alara's mother for her dowry, a dowry that has been steadily plundered for the last 10 years to pay for gowns and jewels and to cover your husband's gambling debts." He turned his gaze to my father, who flinched as if struck. "And these last documents are even more interesting. They are loan agreements between Baron Croft and your family. It seems the final payment on these debts is to be made with Alara herself. You were not marrying her off, you were selling her." The Baron sputtered, his face turning a blotchy purple. "This is an outrage, slander." "Is it?" Alaric asked, one eyebrow raised. "My solicitors are waiting at your crumbling, debt-ridden estate as we speak, Baron. Shall we have them compare their ledgers with these?" The Baron deflated, sinking back into his chair like a punctured wineskin. He was finished. My father covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, belated sobs. Lady Beatrice stood frozen, her mask of gentility shattered, revealing the grasping, hideous creature beneath. And then Alaric looked at me. He had done it all for me. He had wielded his power and his wealth not as a hammer, but as a shield. He had not believed the lies for a single second. He had trusted me. He had defended me. He had seen the truth of me when I could no longer see it myself. Empowered by that look, I found my voice. It was not loud. It was not hysterical. It was as clear and cold as a winter morning. "You were wrong about me," I said, looking directly at the woman who had tormented me for a decade. "My entire life, you have told me I was quiet and plain and worthless. You used my silence as proof of my emptiness. You told me I was a shadow, and you hoped if you said it enough, I would simply fade away." I took a step forward, feeling a strength I never knew I possessed. But silence is not emptiness. My mind was never silent. It was building castles while you were playing with dolls. It was studying history while you were studying gossip. You thought my quietness was a weakness you could exploit, but it was my sanctuary. It was the place where I kept the part of myself that you could never touch, never break, and never, ever understand. I turned to my father, his face still buried in his hands. "And you," I said, my voice softening with a deep, ancient sorrow, "you let her do it. For the sake of a quiet life, you sacrificed your own daughter's happiness. I hope the silence you bought was worth the price." Finally, I looked at Rosalind, who was weeping silently, her beautiful face streaked with tears. She met my gaze and whispered, "I'm sorry, Alara. I was blind." And in that moment, I knew we might one day find our way back to being sisters. But my business in that house was done. The cage was broken. The ghost was gone. Alaric stepped forward and held out his hand. "Alara," he said simply. I walked to him, not looking back at the wreckage of my former life. I placed my hand in his, and together we walked out of that house and into the rest of our lives. He took me not to a city residence, but to a small private park that overlooked the river, its autumn trees shedding leaves of gold and crimson. The air was cool and clean, washing away the suffocating atmosphere of the drawing room. We stood by a stone balustrade, watching the water flow toward the sea, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was no longer a void, but a space filled with understanding. "She will not trouble you again," Alaric said finally, his voice low. "Nor will your father. I have made arrangements. The dowry that was stolen from you will be repaid with interest. It is more than enough for you to live independently, comfortably, for the rest of your life. You are free." I looked at him, at his strong, severe profile outlined against the gray sky. He had given me justice. He had given me freedom. He had given me back my own name, cleared of the lies that had been slung at it. It was more than I had ever dreamed of. And yet, the thought of that independent, comfortable life, a life without him, felt suddenly as desolate as the ruined abbey on the moor. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why did you do all of this for me?" He turned to face me, and for the first time, the last of the shadows receded from his eyes, leaving only a startling, vulnerable sincerity. "Because from the moment I read your work, I felt I had met a mind that mirrored my own. A mind that valued substance over ornament, strength over facade. Then, when I saw you at the ball, tucked away in the shadows, I saw a woman who embodied those same principles. You were not performing. You were not grasping. You were simply being." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing my jawline, a touch so tender it made me tremble. "I did not come to rescue you, Alara. I came because I was lost, and I recognized in you a fellow architect. I thought perhaps we could build something together." My heart, which I thought had been shattered and then numbed, began to beat again, a slow, powerful rhythm. "What did you want to build?" I asked, my breath catching. "A life," he said simply, "one based on a solid foundation of respect, one with room for quiet contemplation and spirited debate, one with walls strong enough to keep the world out and windows large enough to let the sun in." His thumb brushed across my lower lip. "Alara Ashworth, you are the most formidable and brilliant woman I have ever met. Will you be my partner, my equal? Will you be my wife?" He was not rescuing the poor, overlooked girl. He was proposing a partnership to a woman he considered his peer. He was not offering me his name and title as a prize, but as a component in a structure they would design together. Tears welled in my eyes, not of sorrow or relief, but of a profound, overwhelming joy. "Yes," I breathed. "Yes, Alaric, I will." He did not smile, not in the conventional sense, but the harsh lines of his face softened, and a light came into his eyes that was more brilliant than any smile. He lowered his head and his lips met mine. The kiss was not a fiery, passionate thing. It was like coming home. It was firm and sure and deep with unspoken promises. It was the end of a very long winter and the first tentative warmth of spring. It tasted of certainty and of peace. 1 year later, I stood on the windy parapet of Blackwood Castle, the Duke's ancestral home in the north. It was a magnificent granite beast of a fortress, perched on a cliff above a churning sea, a place of stark and breathtaking beauty. Alaric stood beside me, his arm wrapped securely around my waist, a bulwark against the wind. In my hand, I held a rolled blueprint, not his, but mine. "The town council approved the design this morning," he said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "The Blackwood Library will be the finest in the north. Your library." I looked down at the plans for the public library I had designed, a building of light and soaring spaces, funded by him but created by me. It was to be built in the heart of the nearby town, a gift to the people. A place for other quiet souls to find their voices among the shelves. My life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. My father, shamed into action, had finally asserted himself. Lady Beatrice had been sent to live with a poor relation in the country, her social ambitions reduced to ashes. Rosalind had married a kind, if not titled gentleman, and in her letters she wrote of a happiness she had never known as the belle of the ball. We were slowly, tentatively, rebuilding our sisterhood on a foundation of truth. But my new life was here, in the north, with Alaric. Our days were a quiet rhythm of shared work and comfortable silence. We spent evenings in his library, our library, reading before a roaring fire, my feet often propped in his lap. Our conversations were still the bedrock of our relationship, winding journeys through history, philosophy, and the endless complexities of design. Our love was not a loud or showy thing. It was a fortress, built stone by patient stone, designed to withstand any storm. He turned me to face him, his hands cupping my face, his stormy eyes warm and full of a love that still, after a year, took my breath away. "Are you happy here, Alara?" he asked, a question he still posed from time to time, as if he feared I might one day fade back into the shadows. I leaned into his touch, the rough wool of his coat a familiar comfort. I used to think that silence was the color of invisibility, I said, watching a seagull soar on the wind. A gray, empty space where nothing grew, but I was wrong. I looked up into his eyes. With you, I have learned that silence is the color of peace. It is the space where thoughts can take root, where ideas can be built. It is the color of a love that is so sure of its own foundations, it does not need to shout its name. He bent his head and kissed me, a long, slow kiss that tasted of salt and wind and forever. I was no longer the quiet one in the corner. I was the Duchess of Blackwood. I was an architect. I was a wife. I was a woman who had been lost in the shadows and found in the most unexpected way. I was seen, and I was home.